Hey, what's up, Good Life? Thanks for joining me for today's 128 moment. This past Sunday, we continued our Fear Not series with a powerful sermon from Jesse Gill that looked at God's calling on a man named Joshua to step into the oversized shoes of a man named Moses. Can you imagine what it must have felt like to take over for the man who had stood in the face of Pharaoh, the man that God had used to call down the plagues on Egypt and to part the Red Sea, the man who had stood in the very presence of God to receive the law written by the hand of God. If anyone had reason to be fearful, it was Joshua. And yet, over and over again, God told Joshua in the passage we studied Sunday to be strong and courageous. At least 3 different times, the Lord gave Joshua that same charge. Why was God so insistent on this point? Well, it's because, as Jesse pointed out last week, that just a few verses earlier, as Moses was about to pass away before the people went into the promised land, Joshua was there when God said that his people, they'd conquer the land that he had promised to them, but soon after they'd wander away from the Lord and they'd turn to worshiping the gods of the Canaanites. In the face of not only this fearful calling, but in the shadow of that fall that his people would have into sin, God called Joshua to be strong and courageous. How would Joshua respond? Well, before we answer that question about him, let's look to our own situation. We're called to carry the good news of Jesus into a culture that seems to vehemently reject and oppose everything that we hold dear. And yet, you can see the effects of our national wandering in the state of our nation's family. We can see the impact, the devastating impact that this wandering has had. Half of all American marriages end in divorce. You've heard that stat, but what about this one? Studies show that 15% of women, 21% of men have had at least one extramarital affair. Every year, more than 3 million children witness domestic violence in their homes. And even worse, there's a report of child abuse made once every 10 seconds in this country of ours. Our nation's families are under attack, and clearly they're not as healthy as we need them to be. And this isn't a new problem. The enemy's first attack was on the first family. As Eve listened to the lies of the serpent, Adam stood by and he did absolutely nothing. The apathy and the sheer cowardice of the first husband is every bit as infuriating as the mutiny and sin committed by the first wife. Sin entered into the world through the family, and it has wreaked havoc ever since. If we think we can rely on our own strength, on our own frail strength and wisdom, we're going to make a royal mess of our homes. We cannot be strong and courageous on our own. We cannot be the husbands and wives, the fathers and the mothers that God has called us to be if we think we're going to be strong and courageous in and of ourselves. And yet, I believe the declining health of the American family can begin to turn when just one home draws a line in the sand. Once the Israelites, once they'd gone into the promised land, once they'd settled there, and aged Joshua, looking back on his life and looking forward for his people, he'd lived out God's calling to be strong and courageous. He reminded them to never forget about the one who had provided them a home. In chapter 24, Joshua powerfully declares, "Choose this day, Israel, whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Our current times could give us ample reasons to be fearful. Witnessing the faltering and the failing of our culture and our families around us can be discouraging, and it can be heartbreaking. But in the face of all those really powerful fears, if you're following Jesus, God still calls you and he still calls me to be strong and courageous. So no matter whether you are married today or you hope to be married one day, or today you got no interest in being married, you know what? You can respond just as Joshua did. Can you boldly and courageously declare that as for me and my house and my life and my family, we will serve the Lord? I believe the state of our current culture can begin to turn when men and women of faith step into their calling to boldly and courageously live out and share the good news of Jesus. And no matter what has happened to your life to this point, you can start doing that in your house today. Hope that encourages you and challenges you. Hopefully you'll join us on Sunday at 10 o'clock as we continue our Fear Not series. And until that, let's be a people who boldly and courageously love enough.